can't lose.
No, we can't lose.
Enjoy it while it lasts. Gambling gods, fickle bunch.
Oh, yeah.
So easily
We
affected.
have a shooter and a good one coming out for a new point. Get your bets down, ladies and gentlemen. He's a rolling point is 9, place 9. 9 a winner. Got a hot hand. Place your bets, ladies and gentlemen.
They bet on absolutely anything. Don't make them prove.
That's a square edge, which is going to be a lot more reliable than the sharp edge.
You're tuned in to Gambling with Good Juju.
Welcome in, everybody, to Gambling with Good JuJu, the show with more bank than roll. Or maybe it's more roll than bank. We could stand to lose a few pounds, bud.
Oh my gosh.
There's a shot at us. Hey, while we kick things off, do us a favor and head on over to YouTube or your favorite podcast platform and give us a like, follow, subscribe, all those buttons to let them know you appreciate what we're doing. Give us a follow on the socials at Good Juju Bets. And if you really like us, then head on over to goodjujubets.net, click on the merch shop, and show your support. Today, we're being joined by Dan Abrams, author of the book, But How Much Did You Lose? How to Win More at Sports Betting by Losing Less. Dan, welcome into the show. To kick things off, can you give us a little background on what led you to decide to write a book on the topic of bankroll management?
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I definitely did not decide just on a whim that I was just going to write a book about this stuff. I had started sports betting about 5 years ago and was learning from some very successful poker players who were also sports betting at the time, one of whom became my editor, Eric Rodewig. And we were kind of going back and forth about the subject of hedging and whether it ever made mathematical sense to do it if you couldn't get a plus EV bet while you were making your hedge. And I worked out a lot of the math, and I just kind of, instead of trying to explain it to him over like 1,000 text messages, I wrote it up like an article because I had written articles about poker many, many years ago. So I wrote it up like that. And he was like, wow, are you sure this is like really true? Are you sure this is accurate? And I said, yes, I triple checked everything and I'm sure about it. And he's like, well, this is pretty amazing stuff because I've been betting sports for a while and I've never heard anything like this.
What was the, I guess, historical norm with regards to should you hedge or should you not hedge? Before you wrote the book, before you got into it, what was sort of the main discourse around that?
Basically, everybody who was considered a sharp sports bettor or considered themselves sharp said, you know, you have to treat every bet independently. And if you're going to make a new bet on something, you want that bet by itself to have an edge, to be plus EV. And if you have to make a negative EV bet in order to hedge against an existing bet, that's a bad idea because You're giving back some of that edge that you've earned. You're paying the VIG again, and that's a no-no. And then on the other side, you had a lot of, recreational bettors who kind of, would feel it in their gut, like, oh, I can't just like let it ride. I need to at least lock up some profit or that sort of thing. So those were the two sides of the argument, and of course all the sharp better says, well, that's just squares being squares, that might make them feel better, but it's in the end it's going to make them lose. And then so what I was able to show is that in reality it's not just your expected value that you want to concentrate on, it's the expected growth of your bankroll, and that factors in the amount of risk you're taking. And in order to reduce your risk, sometimes it's worth giving up some expected value.
So expected growth and expected value are two different metrics, and you get into that in the book. Can you give us a breakdown, maybe a little more technical, what you mean by expected growth?
Okay, so expected growth just means that half of the time your bankroll is going to grow to a number bigger than this amount, and half the time it's going to grow to a number smaller than that amount. Now, sometimes The smaller amount could be negative growth. You could be losing, or you could just be winning less than, you figure out your expected growth to be. But that's different than expected value, because expected value tells you the average amount that you're going to win. And averages can be distorted by some very big payouts that have a very small chance of happening. So in other words, if you have like a 50% edge on something, but there's only a 0.1% chance that you're going to hit it, how valuable really is that in terms of growing your bankroll? Whereas if you have a 50% edge on something that's got like a 20% chance to hit, now you're talking, right? This is going to hit 1 out of every 5 times or so, and it's really going to make your bankroll jump when it hits. And in the, as a ridiculous example, if you could get a 50% edge on a 50-50 proposition, now like, the world is your oyster. You're going to, occasionally you're going to lose, but you're going to grow by leaps and bounds when you win.
Got it. So if you're focusing primarily just on that expected value and not on the expected growth, what are your pitfalls long term? Like, what are you running? Is it just reduced profit, or are you running into risk that can, if you've got an edge and it has a high variance, right? You're going to be struggling with your bankroll until that variance turns positive for you. Is that what the net implication is in terms of expected value, and relying solely on that as your edge, is that it can ultimately do net harm to the bankroll?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think most people who are good, experienced, sharp bettors understand that you don't want to overbet your bankroll. But what do we really mean by overbetting, right? Most people would say never bet more than the Kelly Criterion would tell you to bet, given the edge and the odds on a particular bet. And most of the time, you shouldn't even bet full Kelly. That's way too aggressive. Right. You're going to have giant swings, which is true. When you're actually just betting one bet at a time, you will have giant swings if you were to bet full Kelly. The idea is that there's a certain optimal amount that you should be betting, and anything more than that is bad. But if all you're thinking about is expected value, then there really is no limit to how much you would want to bet in order to get the most expected value. For instance, if you have a bet with a 10% edge and you bet $100 on it, the average amount you're going to win is $10, 10% of $100.
Right.
If instead you bet $1,000, the average amount you're going to win is $100, 10% of $1,000. So say your whole bankroll is $10,000. Well, if you bet your whole bankroll with a 10% edge, the average amount you're going to win is $1,000. Well, that's the biggest average you can get, right? So you might as well just bet your whole bankroll and hopefully you win. And if not, you find something else to do. And most people understand intuitively that's not a good idea. There really is some maximum amount that you should be betting, and that maximum amount is where your expected growth is the highest. But that Kelly Criterion that everybody talks about only deals with betting one bet at a time, and every time you make a bet, you have to wait till it grades, figure out whether you won or lost, adjust your bankroll size, and then you can use that bankroll size to figure out the percentage for the next bet.
Right.
It never dealt with situations that people deal with now, which is you can hedge if you have like a futures bet or a bet that's like a 3-leg parlay, and now you've won the first 2 legs and you've got the third still open. You can middle bet, where you bet the Sixers plus 9.5 and the Heat minus 6.5 in the same game, and you can hit the middle. So there's all sorts of combinations of bets that you can make that the Kelly Criterion doesn't deal with, and that's what I was trying to fill in the gaps on.
Right. We mentioned now that somewhat pitfalls of a little bit of the thought process that I think your book is kind of helping us as an entire betting society like grow a little bit, right? Like that's the intention here. And with that, you have a new, I think it's new for you thought this up or came up with the square root sizing, right?
Yes. I didn't invent the actual, the math behind it, but I invented the simplified version of how to calculate it, and I invented the name.
Yeah. And it's like, we talked a lot on here about betting to win versus betting to risk and those type of simple ways of thinking it. But like, this is like the next level for that, right? And how much you decide to bet of your bankroll based on the, I guess, would you say it's mostly based on the probability of you winning?
It's mostly based on the actual odds that are offered to you, which, is the inverse of the probability of you winning. So to a certain extent, yes. To answer your question briefly, yes.
Love the chart in here. That's very helpful in understanding the theory for sure. So thank you for including that. I think this is going to change a lot in how I do my day-to-day betting.
Well, let's talk about this in a little bit more depth here, because we've had the conversation about betting to risk versus betting to win. It was actually a topic on the show.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we got into that particular topic is because we were top-down bettors, still are. And it's interesting that when you bet to risk, you're always finding that the minus or the plus EV plays, or the plus odds plays 100 or better, are going to carry much more weight in your overall portfolio than your minus 150s. But if you're betting to win, then those minus 150s to 200s kind of overweight your portfolio relative to the plus odds plays. How does this particular system kind of address that?
It falls right in the middle between those two strategies, and it essentially balances what you would believe the expected growth to be of each of your bets. If you assume that the edge that you would get depends on the square root of the odds that you're betting in at. Now, why would you assume that? Well, there's a guy named Joseph Buchdahl who has written several books on sports betting. And one of the things that he studied was he took years and years worth of data from soccer bets, 50,000 matches, and checked the best odds in the market that he could find to bet on, and was able to figure out on average what kind of edge that those best bets in the market represented, depending on what odds they were offered at. So obviously in some of these powerhouse teams, they're going to go off at minus 500 to win against, some second tier squad. And vice versa. The second tier squad is going to be, plus 700, plus 1,000, something like that. What he was able to show is that, and when you look at the best price in the market, the edge that you're going to get is going to vary with this certain pattern, which turned out to be the square root of the odds. So what I said was, okay, if you're going to have this kind of effect, wouldn't you get the same expected growth by betting full Kelly on all of these possibilities? And it turned out to be right. Now, you don't have to bet full Kelly. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just
scared
me. Whether you're betting, whatever, you're comfortable betting, usually what's going to happen in the market is that you're going to find much bigger edges at long shots, plus 1,000, plus 1,500, than you are at massive favorites. And it's all going to kind of approximate the curves that I show in the book. And if that's true, then by betting this root unit method, you're getting the same type of effect that you would if you were Kelly betting, but, like a quarter Kelly, that sort of thing, not full Kelly. But you don't have to do any of the calculations. It's all just baked into, you see, if normally you're betting $100 at, minus 110, and you're looking at the same market, NBA or college football or whatever it is you're specializing in, and you see a team going off at plus 400, and you're like, oh, this is definitely the best price in the market. Everything else is, like plus 300, plus 310, that sort of thing. What's going to make the best play is to use the square root of those odds, which are 4 to 1. So the square root of that is 2, and then you divide your normal amount by 2, because there's a lot more risk, right? You're still only going to hit 20-some% of the time, but you're going to probably have a bigger edge. So you divide your normal unit size by 2 when you're making that bet. On the flip side, the minus 400 type teams, you would double the size of your normal bet.
That's what I was just going to ask. So I was about to say, so do we just ignore the heavy favorites?
Yeah.
No, you're saying we just take a slightly different approach. You're looking to multiply instead of on the underdogs, you're dividing, and on the heavy favorites, you're multiplying that number. Is that what I just heard? Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So like if you were betting, to win one unit at minus 400, normally you would bet 400 to win 100,
Right.
Yep.
right? With the root unit system, you're betting 200 to win 50 in that case.
Oh. And is that because of that inherent baked in factor of long shots are giving you better overall odds than heavy favorites? Is that what drives that sort of formula?
Yes.
The hypothesis behind it, if you will.
Yes.
Oh.
That if it's the best price in the market, you're going to get a bigger edge on long shots than you do on favorites.
And we've
Not
heard
if it's like an average price.
Yeah. And when we talk to a lot of folks about just like utilizing the promos and stuff that come through on sports books. And we've seen over the years that when it comes to utilizing those sorts of like profit boosts and things like that, the sports books will give you, the sharp bettors, the people that we tend to respect, generally lean towards underdogs almost universally in those scenarios.
Yeah, because and they're line shopping as well as part of that process. In other words, they're not just boosting some random long shot. They're finding a long shot that looks like it's the best price in the market compared to other books, and then they're putting the boost on top of it. And then that's when you get the really big edges.
Yep.
You start double dipping.
Yeah. Feels good. Feels good. All right. So another topic here, you write that there are two ways to lose: betting on unprofitable plays and risking too much on profitable ones. Which of those do you think is the more common leak for most bettors?
Well, I think in the general population, it's betting on unprofitable plays, because the vast majority of bettors really don't have an edge. They don't know how to quantify things properly in order to find an edge. They're just like, oh man, the Giants are on a roll now. They've won like 8 games in a row or whatever, and there's no way they're going to lose tonight. There's no way. Well, there's always a way. So if you're not doing true mathematical analysis to find an edge, you're probably not finding an edge. So most people, I think, are not starting out with an edge. But then there are a few people who will bet very aggressively, even with an edge, and they're just taking on too much risk.
Okay. So to sort of sum that up, if you're betting without an edge or a known edge that you can quantify yourself, your problem is you're probably not betting on profitable plays at all. And if you've already uncovered that, if you've gotten to the point where I have an edge, I know that edge, and I'm hitting that edge, the bigger problem for them is probably the unit sizing that they're engaging in with those plays.
Yes. And not only the unit sizing, often people are really conservative with their unit sizing. But there are cases that it's not just a question of how much you stake initially. It's also a question of, is it worth buying back? Is it worth hedging against it? Is it worth making a more complicated play where you can bet more up front and then hedge later so that you make maximum use of that edge without taking on extra risk?
Oh, yeah. Interesting. So when we're talking about hedging or buying back, it's not necessarily the entire amount you've staked, but to a degree, it could be some of the stake, right? Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty rare that you would find a line that's good enough that you would want to hedge off all of your risk.
Yeah.
You're usually doing a partial hedge when you're doing it.
And so would you say for a sophisticated sports bettor, they need to kind of be a little predictive before trying to take on a action like this? Like to where they might bet more, like on the initial side, they'll bet more because they do believe or perceive the market is going to shift drastically quickly?
Yes, absolutely. That is one thing that I haven't really seen very many people do before, but it very clearly works out in the math in simulations that I've run in my own betting as well. But the key, like you said, is you have to be very sure that you're going to be able to get maybe not a fair line where the EV is exactly 0, but pretty close to fair in order to make that hedge or that middle layer on.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah. So let me ask this. Do you consider yourself primarily a top-down bettor?
Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Mhm.
So we are talking a lot about, the efficient market theory when we're talking about finding an edge here.
Yeah, certainly in my case, that's the way I will, find edges for my own betting, and for people that I talk to, and but it's not limited to that. I mean, you can find an edge initially from a bottom up perspective,
Right.
but typically when you're doing the hedge later on or middle later on, that's all going to be driven by top down analysis, trying to find the best price in the market for that.
Hybrid approach.
For the audience, efficient market theory. What is it?
You want to let Dan answer that, or?
I don't care.
Yeah, go
I
for
just
it.
want the audience.
You're looking at me. It's
dropped
making
a
me
big,
nervous.
we dropped a big term on the audience there, and I want to make sure that we cover our bases. Dan,
Yeah, okay.
Efficient market theory. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, so it's several big words here, but all it means is that by the time the game or the match starts, in most cases, there's been so much money bet into that market on one side or the other of the spread, money line, whatever it is, that the book has been responding to, right? Somebody makes a huge bet on one side, they move the number. Somebody makes a bet on the other side, they move the number back a little bit. Eventually, they settle on a number or a money line that is the best possible representation of what it really should be, because people have been betting lots of money into it, and the people with lots of money usually are good at betting.
For the audience's sake here, efficient market theory is the basis of the project we're working on, where we're evaluating efficient parent lines and then generating our own derivative markets or own derivative market lines off of that.
Yeah, bingo.
There you go.
All right, so somewhat related here. Let's talk about minimizing variance a little bit, because this is something that seems very closely related to the square root process on the bet sizing, but something that's keeping me up at night here with my blackjack betting strategy.
We like to go to the casino too, Dan. We're not
Yeah.
just sports bettors.
Yeah,
Yeah, so let's talk about the importance of minimizing variance just overall in betting.
definitely. And I've watched some of your other videos and stuff, and you have guys on, that play craps and that sort of thing. My basic theory is, and this, I've proven this out, is that variance is bad for everyone. Okay. It can be fun. It's great to hit that 100 to 1 shot, but in terms of your bankroll, variance is bad for everyone. So even if you're playing a game that has negative EV to begin with, like blackjack, if you play it perfectly and you're not counting cards, there's a small edge for the house, tiny little edge for the house. But even if you're playing with a negative edge, limiting your variance is still important, because if you're going to lose, you lose a little bit instead of losing a lot. And when you lose a lot, it hurts you twice, because now not only are you out the money, but you have less of a cushion in your bankroll for the next time you're betting. So even if you're betting with an edge, you need to have that bankroll cushion. If you're betting with a negative edge, you definitely need that cushion so you don't get bled dry.
Is that the biggest misconception bettors have when they hear minimizing variance? Is that they don't realize that there's two aspects to it?
I think so. Yeah, because people talk about the risk of ruin. In other words, all they're trying to do is just not go broke. If they lose 50% of their bankroll, I'll just grind it back up. But it's not that simple, because you're typically losing that cushion, so you have to reduce your bet sizes. If you're betting with an edge, that reduces the amount that you would expect to win. If you're betting just for fun, it reduces your fun. So either way, you lose.
So how does the book then address that? Because I'm pretty sure you get into that specific topic within the book, correct?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I talk about in there is I actually quantify with numbers a cost of variance. In other words, if you have something going on where there's like a 10% chance of getting this much money, you can figure out what the expected value is of that to you. But you can also figure out a different thing that's called a certainty equivalent, which means based on the amount of risk you're taking compared to the size of your bankroll, it's the amount of money that you should be willing to cash out your ticket for and just accept as cash money in return. And that's never the same thing as your expected value. It's always some amount less than the expected value. And the bigger that difference, the bigger the cost of the variance is to you in that situation.
To clarify for the audience, when you talk about cashing out of that bet, you're referencing a strategy such as hedging to do so, right? And the only reason I say this, because all those sports books now with their mobile betting apps have that little cash out button that's right there on it. And we know, or at least we've been taught, don't ever click that button. There are more efficient ways to get to that, correct?
Yeah, 99% of the time, you don't want to click the button. There are occasions where they mess up, or some books will actually, like, you make a play and they'll give you like 30-minute grace period where you can cash out without any penalty. And so sometimes if the bet loses value, you want to cash out with no penalty. But 99% of the time, their cash out button is a terrible offer. And you should be looking for a different way to effectively cash out. You can hedge against it. If you can't hedge against it, there are services like WagerWire where you can sell off your ticket and somebody else is going to buy it up from you, and you get guaranteed money that way. But yeah, you have to be a little bit more creative than just be like, oh, let me cash out right here.
I accept the offer.
I hear the word cash out, and I just want to always clarify people don't click the button.
Yeah. So let me relate this to blackjack one more time, just to know where my head's at.
Yes.
Because you actually even brought up, like, playing perfect strategy, which I don't know exactly perfect strategy like with surrenders, but I've taught myself the simple perfect strategy of blackjack. I got that down now.
Okay.
However, I'm playing with this idea where short term, the doubles and the splits, if you really still have a pretty big chance of losing, even though you're taking the house edge down, introduce too much variance in your bankroll.
Okay.
So I'm hearing about this new strategy where basically, like, you just take those out.
Okay.
So spoiler alert, may get a little recap on this if I
wait a second. So you're saying you no longer double down or split at all?
Not at all. Like, only if it's very advantageous.
Okay.
Like, you split 9s against a 5. Something like that.
Okay.
But you don't split 8s just every time because the book says, as a for instance.
What do you think of that, Dan? I
hadn't heard that before specifically, though I know people play a lot of variations in blackjack.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of cases that are very, very close as far as, your expected value, whether you should do a double down or a split or just play it normally. If it makes you feel more comfortable with your bankroll, and it definitely will decrease your variance. So there is an advantage to doing it that way. I think that's a reasonable way to go about it. Like you said, you're not going to, ban it from your repertoire entirely. But on some of these very marginal cases, reducing your variance there will help preserve your bankroll, because, you know intuitively that you're not going to come out ahead playing blackjack unless you're counting. Right. But you want to make that bankroll last as long as you can, which is very important, and you need to reduce variance in order to do that.
Now, we'll see how I handle it when somebody yells at me.
This doesn't make any sense. Because for you, I've walked to the craps table with you, bud. Basically, what you're saying now is next time I walk to the craps table, you're just going to be playing the 6 and the 8.
Yeah, maybe I do.
That doesn't sound like you.
Well, you got to have a little gambling. Jeez.
All right. Enough of the blackjack. We're going to get back to the book.
Back to sports betting.
Back to the book. All right. Dan, can you do me a favor? And if this is a struggle, just let me know. But can you walk through a real life example of how someone might apply your optimal bet sizing model, especially if they already have like multiple bets pending?
Definitely. And one of the best examples is when you have a parlay going, like a 3 or 4 leg parlay, And, there's a whole lot of debate about, is it ever a good idea to play parlays if you're betting with an edge and you're trying to be a sharp better? But there's so many promotions now that people are playing that have to be parlays. The books make it part of the boost, right? You have to play 3 legs. It has to be at least plus 400 combined odds and that sort of thing.
Caesars has gotten to 5 legs. Like,
Oh my
good luck
gosh.
finding. You can't bet 5 two-way lines and not have it be like plus 1,500.
Yeah.
If you're betting minus 110s or whatever. So Caesars has made it. No, it's only plus 400, but you have to have 5 legs.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Jeez.
Right. So one of the things I would say is, like, if you're doing college football and you have one of these Caesars parlays where you have to bet 5 legs on it, number one, you don't have to bet spreads. You can bet money lines, so you can throw in some favorites in there, so you're not getting plus 2,500 for your final number. But no matter how you do it, try to make sure that you have one leg that's going to start after all the other ones have finished. Okay. Because if you hit, the first 4 out of 5 legs, and now you've got one leg left, you can shop around. You can look around and see if you can get a reasonable price betting the other way from your original bet. You can hedge there, usually a partial hedge, lock up some of that profit, and actually increase your expected growth by doing it. Now, you can't take the worst price in the market. You got to find the best price in the market, and it's got to be pretty reasonable. But that's the kind of thing where you get the Saturday night game in your parlay, and you win the first 4, and now you're looking around to find a good price to hedge. And with the efficient market hypothesis that, congratulations there, Pete, on getting that out correctly. But, with that theory in play, usually if you've got like a big game Saturday night in college football, by the time you get to like 15 minutes before kickoff, it's going to have a lot of money bet into that market. Yeah. It's going to be a very efficient market. And if you can find places, especially with some of these exchanges now that have opened up across the U.S., if you've got a chance at, say it is a spread, right? You've bet like plus 9.5 on the underdog initially, and now you can find minus 9.5 on the favorite at minus 103 at one of these exchanges or something like that. That's a fantastic price. It's not going to be plus EV, but if you hedge off, say, half of your possible risk in that case, it's going to increase your expected growth.
As a general gambling strategy, do you arbitrage bet yourself?
I do sometimes. I did more in the past before I got limited so heavily on a lot of these books. But I definitely do sometimes, especially in cases where it's just not that clear which side you would actually have an edge on.
Yeah. Right.
But one of the things that I wrote about in the book is what I call an auto-hedge, which is basically a combination of value betting and arbitrage betting. And that's actually even better than arbitrage. So I very rarely do like a strict arbitrage where I try to match up the amounts so that you get the exact same payout no matter who wins. Usually what I'll do is I can usually gauge based on which books are the 2 choices.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which one is going to be the value side based on how badly they usually get their odds mixed up. So I'll bet as much as I can. I'll bet the limit on that one, and then I'll figure out how much do I want to hedge off against it right away. I'm not waiting around because I've got an arbitrage type of price, but I'm not going to necessarily arb off all of that initial bet so that it pays out the exact same amount. I might arb off 70% and leave another 30% to ride, so you get the combination of a value bet and arbitrage.
And that's best based on a very specific formula. Like the 70% is, here's the formula you get there, and that's going to tell you how much to do it. It's not, I'm going to hedge off 70%, correct?
Right. Oh, yes. Yes. There's definitely a very specific formula to figure out the optimum. But the really cool thing about it is that once you start doing it, you can build up an intuition pretty quickly as to how much you want to be hedging off without having to run through the calculations. And the way the math works out is if you get the optimal amount dead on, that's great. But if you're off in your bet size for a hedge by like 5 or 10% of what would be optimal, you're really not giving up very much.
Right.
You're really very, very close to the amount of expected growth you would get with that optimal amount.
Well, here's what makes this sound so interesting to me. Because as a top-down bettor, we've been taught to chase the stale line on the stale book. So if you've got, for example, a 4-leg parlay, like you said, with 3 games starting at 6 and 1 game starting at 9, and your and you went and you price shopped all those games, your odds are, come that 9 p.m. game, you've gotten better odds on that game than what's currently available.
You should have some value.
You should have CLV,
yeah,
as we talk about. So that puts that hedge into even a better position for you because that number has moved towards the opposite side being more favorable.
Yeah, not to mention you boosted it.
And you boosted it. But when you get to even if you're not boosting, even if you're not doing that, but if you've got a parlay with 4+ EV legs, right?
Yeah.
And you line chopped them and then you get to that 9 p.m. game, that number isn't even at a fair book price most of the time at that point. And you're probably recommending this book for people who already grasp that kind of a concept, correct, Dan?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely assume people are starting from the point where they know how to find an edge. They know how to quantify roughly what that edge would be, and they have some idea of how to bet it already.
Yeah.
Does this book get into anything around the lines of, what if your edge isn't what you think it is? Because we've had that conversation a lot as well, Dan.
Yes. I do touch on that. That's not really the focus of it, but I do touch on that. One of the things I talk about is that I define 2 different types of edges, one being a sharp edge and one being a square edge. A sharp edge is something that, you're modeling something out, you're using a bottom up type of approach where, you're using your model or your expertise to come up with a better line than the books have. And you're saying, okay, the difference between that represents my edge. And it's been shown by other people besides me that often, what you think that edge is not exactly what the true edge is. And if you're going to be wrong, usually it's wrong in the direction of you have a smaller edge than you thought.
Right.
I was going to say that's what I call a sharp edge. And the other side is the square edge, where you're using a top-down method like, you guys have been doing, where you're looking for the best price in the market and you're saying, okay, these guys have these odds. The rest of the market's over here with these odds. I can kind of devig that market average or some of those sharp books to figure out what sort of true odds should be. And that's how I can calculate my edge at this other book. And that's a square edge, which is going to be a lot more reliable than the sharp edge.
I love that phrasing.
Yeah, that's
sharp
awesome.
edge versus square edge. I'm going to be clipping that quote right there, Dan, because I feel the same way. When we top down bet, I feel like it's a square edge. Like anyone, the skill isn't necessarily in your own work. The skill is in just knowing the market and timing it correctly.
Yeah.
So,
but to his point, more reliable.
It is. Look, I get it. My ADHD brain doesn't appreciate it as much as a general betting perspective, though, I think.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I can't wait to continue having hedging conversations with you now, because you've been, don't talk to me about hedging for a long time.
This is a little bit of a brain warp for me.
Good.
Because at the end of the day, I have always been team no hedge, Dan. I like to let it ride. I like the variance.
I
got a little Jolly St. Vic in me.
Yeah, I heard that.
So, but I do like the idea of locking up more consistent, reliable bankroll growth.
Yeah, I never really wrapped up the concept nicely in my head as you've done, but it's like, I want more when I'm done here.
Let me tell it to you this way. If you were to look at, Dan, my picket, if you will, to track my bets, if I'm doing top-down betting religiously, focusing on those quality lines that I know I'm getting an edge in, my profit line it's unlike anything I've seen in data analysis, where it just goes from the bottom left to the top right corner whenever I'm doing it. If I'm not doing consistent top-down betting, let's say I'm just doing promotional betting, like you said, where I'm getting a lot of plus EV plays, but it's tied into SGPs or parlays or things of that nature, I'll still see that growth, but it's going to look more like a roller coaster throughout the course of the month as I'm trying to build that out. So I think that with this book, especially as we move into some of the more advanced stuff that we're trying to work on, this can very simply be integrated into the work that we're doing to help create that more consistent bottom left to top right corner that we're looking for.
Good thought process, like another important tool in the toolbox for sure.
Exactly. Okay, so Dan, looking forward, what do you hope readers take away from the book, not just in terms of betting smarter, but thinking differently about risk in general?
Well, I definitely hope that they'll start to think about risk in a more mathematical way rather than just saying, oh, well, I don't want to overbet, so I'm only going to flat stake, or I'm only going to bet, $30 a game and then maybe boost it up to $40 a game next month. It doesn't hurt to use the same type of math that you do to find an edge in order to help quantify your risk. It's really, that by the time I get to the answer, the formulas that I present, they're really not that complicated to use, most of them. So try them out. Try different techniques. I talk about different shortcuts in the book, where, I compare hedging to giving yourself an odds boost of a certain amount. So anybody who's doing those kind of promotional bets should have an intuitive feel for what that's like, where you can get a 10% boost, that's okay. But like a 20% boost, that's pretty good. You want to take advantage of that. And there are, times where you're going to have enough on the line where if you hedge against it, it's like you're giving yourself a 20% boost on a pretty big chunk of money. So that's the kind of thing I think people can kind of work into their normal everyday betting a little bit more easily.
Very cool.
That's perfect. That gives us something to think about for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Before we let you go, Dan, we would be remiss not to point out your love for the game of poker in the casino, especially Razz.
Whatever Razz is.
Now, look, we love going to the casino, Dan. We were in college during the moneymaker days. So, of course, we were in that just weird group where everyone was watching poker instead of basketball on our weeknights. I don't know what Razz is. So can you tell us what Razz is and why that was a focus for you as a particular poker game?
It's a very strange kind of game where if you've ever played 7-card stud, it's dealt out exactly like 7-card stud. But instead of playing to get the best regular poker hand, you play to get the best low hand.
Wow.
So the worst hand?
You want the worst hand?
Yes.
Oh
you
my
want
God.
The worst hand.
Sounds like something I'd be good at.
Okay. Does it care about, like, let's say, okay, so I'm going to assume, is ace 2, 3, 4, 6 the worst hand? Or is ace 2, 3, 4, 5 the worst hand? Or is it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? What is it?
For Razz, it's ace 2, 3, 4, 5. Because an ace counts as a 1. And you don't count straights, you don't count flushes. So even if it's all suited, it doesn't count against you.
Okay, so if you have it all suited and the other one, and you have the same hand, but yours is all suited and the other one isn't, that's a tie. That makes absolutely no difference in this game.
Yep, that's a tie.
Wow.
All right, well, we got to find a Razz game.
Well, we can't even find poker rooms anymore, Dan. They seem to be disappearing.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of a dying game to some degree, and Razz has been dying even quicker than that. So it's pretty rare to find. I mean, Poker Stars now has some American sites, and I'm lucky enough to be in New Jersey, so I can actually play the Razz tournaments here sometimes. But it's a lot harder to find now than it used to be back in the moneymaker days.
Do you feel managing variance is different in poker or in sports betting, or is it pretty much the exact same?
The concepts are the exact same. Poker, sports betting, investing, taking out student loans, whatever you're doing with money, with large sums of money, variance and bankroll management or wealth management, the math is all the same. It just gets applied differently. So in poker, you talk about if you're a tournament player, you don't want to enter, $1,500 tournaments when you only have a $10,000 bankroll because you're going to run out real quick. So there are formulas and advice for how to apportion your bankroll based on the type of tournaments you like to play and how many people are in them. Or cash games, you want to have so many, big bets worth in your bankroll in order to sit down at the table, or big blinds if you're playing no limit games. The idea is the same. It just gets expressed differently.
Okay. Last question before we let you go. I'm a brand new person. Forget who I am. And I'm looking to get into a new hobby. I'm considering either getting into and really understanding and going after sports betting, or getting into and going after poker. What are you recommending in 2025?
Oh, yeah. Right now, I would definitely recommend sports betting. There's a lot of advantages to it. You've got a ton of promotional plays that you can get when you first sign up to the sports books that can really jumpstart your bankroll if you're starting from scratch. And, you can start partnering up with people so that you can, find good bets that way and work with them on different sports, different strategies, use that to leapfrog and really grow your bankroll quickly. In poker, you can't take shortcuts with poker without taking way too much risk. So, and by the time you start getting into decent sized stakes, you're playing against really experienced, really, really good players. Whereas in sports betting, you're always going to have the option to find a few different sports books, and usually one of them is going to be wrong.
Do you see the sports betting market getting more difficult to find advantage plays as we move forward?
It's definitely more difficult, but they still exist. They still exist pretty consistently because the rules of the games change and the books have to respond. And the types of bets that they let you make will change, and they're not always going to get them right. When SGPs first came out, yes, they had a really high hold, but there were a lot of ways to exploit them. Not so much anymore, but there are still other things that are going on. I mean, people were just talking about this past week, talking about draft betting. Like the casinos in Vegas have finally instituted very low limits on draft bets, because for years and years and years, it was Lollapalooza for professional and other sharp sports bettors, picking off good numbers for these draft props. So they've responded to that. They've lowered their limits, at least until they can figure out how to make good lines. But there's always new things cropping up that are not going to get priced in right away, and that's where your edge is finding how to price that better, either by modeling it or comparing the different lines, like with top down.
Okay. I think that makes me feel a little better.
Good.
I don't know if this has come across it or not, Dan, but I think we're in a little bit of a rut right now, and we're trying to figure our way out of it. This book's going to help us. The other work that we're doing is going to help us.
Yep.
This has been a great conversation. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. You can find his book, and let me get it up here. You can find his book, But How Much Did You Lose, on Amazon, which is where I bought it. Dan, can we find it anywhere else?
No, it's exclusively on Amazon, unless you want a signed copy, in which case you can reach out to me directly. You can DM me on Twitter, which is at Dr. Razz, WSOP there. And for just $10 more shipping and handling, I will happily sign a copy and mail it off to you. And I also just debuted an audiobook version, which is available on Audible, as read not by me, but by an AI generated voice. So it sounds way better than I do. Let me promise you that.
We're old school, and we're going to recommend people get the hard copy.
Yeah.
You want the hard copy, people. Let's go. I do have one last question for you, because I want to ask it. Will you be at Bet Bash this year by chance?
I doubt it. This is a big sideline for me, but it's still a sideline. I have a professional career and everything. So I don't think I'll be at it, but I will be monitoring it from afar.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Hope to meet up in real life soon.
Well, I hope we get to meet you in another way then,
Yeah.
Dan. All right. As Dan mentioned, you can find Dan on Twitter at Dr. Razz WSOP. That's Dr. RAZZWSOP for more great information about the book and sports betting in general. Good juju to your bets, everyone. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Vegas 360 to discuss their book.
Yeah,
correct?
fantastic.
We're getting into the authors this season. So thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate you joining us. Good juju to you and have a great rest of your week.